Hello, Jill.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you too. Thank you for joining on time. Can you try to share your screen? Let's see if that is possible. Great.
Yeah, there we go.
Yes. Yes, I can see your screen. So we'll just wait for others to join in then. I think this would have been the only tricky part, but since I can see your screen, then I think we're good.
Should I leave my screen shared? Should I?
It's okay. You can leave it shared.
Okay. So I'll just leave this up like this?
Yes, and then we'll wait once it's 8 o'clock on the site. Then what time is it where you are? 12, I think.
11 in the morning.
11. Well, thank you. Thank you for doing this. So I first came across your work when I joined the Executive Function Summit.
Yes. Seth
Last
Perler.
year. Yes. When I joined that summit, and one of the things I found so interesting about it was the fact that an entire summit was dedicated to executive function. I thought that was fantastic. So there were different ways to look at it. There were different angles. People tackled it from, the classroom, the house, if it was homework, if it was classwork, if it was just anything, linking it to all other conditions. It was just an amazing summit. And when I listened to your session, I thought, oh God, I need to get that person to speak again. I need to get that person to speak again, because sometimes you come across people and you're like, okay, would this person be the right fit for the audience? Would this person not be the right fit for the audience? So I'm hoping that today, one of the things that we would achieve is to take the realities that we have into consideration during the presentation. So as I mentioned in my email, some of our teachers work in low-income schools. I mean, they are from low-income context. And so sometimes when we sit and say, okay, for executive function planning, maybe you should be able to use this material or that material, they may not have access to those things. And so what exactly can they do, given that particular constraint? So that's one of the things I'm really hoping that would help them today.
Yeah, and these are pretty global concepts that you can apply everywhere. So
yes, so we will just wait and do you have a copy of your book handy?
I do.
Okay. So at the end of the presentation, I think we might be able to share that with the audience so they know where to find the resources.
I have one that I'm going to offer them as a free download, and then I have a new one also.
Fantastic. Yes, Gina, welcome everyone. We're just waiting. Thank you for asking. Welcome everyone. We're just waiting for people to join in. We'll start in about a minute. Oh, no, you're not having technical issues. Yes. All right, Jill, I'm ready if you're ready. Good evening. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is that you're joining from. And thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Basirat Razaq-Shuaib, and I am the founder of the Winford Center for Children and Women. One of the things that we want to do as a charity that supports children who have neurodevelopmental disorders is to equip parents and educators on ways of better supporting the children who have neurodevelopmental disorders. And at the last conference, the Special Education Needs and Education Conference, one of the topics that came up was executive function. It was identified as an area of gap because some of the attendees mentioned not having any training in this area. And so we have started this year by trying to help fill that knowledge gap through this webinar. And today I have here with me the distinguished Miss Jill Stowell of the Stowell Center. Please, Jill, introduce yourself. Over to you.
All right. Well, I am Jill Stowell. I am the founder and executive director of Stowell Learning Centers. We have 4 centers in Southern California. And we work remotely, actually, with kids all over the world. So that's been really fun, something that opened up during the pandemic. But we work with students who have dyslexia, learning disabilities, high functioning autism. And our goal really is to help them to develop the underlying skills that are causing them to struggle so much. And so with our students with dyslexia and learning disabilities, our goal is really to eliminate the struggles associated with those things by addressing the underlying skills, processing and neurodevelopmental skills that are creating the roadblocks. And even with our autism population of students, functionally and academically and socially, that they can make so many changes when their auditory and visual processing and neurodevelopmental motor skills, when all of those things are working better for them. And so we're never about trying to compensate or cope with the challenges or just manage them, but really trying to get to the root of the problem. So that's my mission, is to share, that hope with parents and teachers that these challenges can, by and large, be eliminated. And so I speak and I write and just do podcasts and keep putting that message out there, because we have been doing this for over 30 years with children and adults, and just know that it's possible. So I'm really delighted to be here today to speak with you. It sounds like an amazing organization, and we're going to talk about executive function. So executive functions are high-level thinking skills that allow us to self-monitor and manage our own attention and behavior. These are real life problem solving and planning and organizing, decision-making skills that really need to be developed in real life and in real time. We learn things like reading and math in order to use them. We develop executive function as we use it, as we have to plan or make decisions or organize or problem solve in real life. So what I want to look at today are 6 key principles and critical skills to build executive function in real time. So number one is the continuum of arousal. In the neuroscience world, attention and stress are looked at on a continuum called the continuum of arousal. At the highest level of the continuum, we're so stressed that, oh my gosh, we can hardly think. We're in survival mode, fight, flight, freeze, or fib. At the lowest level, the person is just zonked. They have no mental bandwidth left to deal with anything. So the ideal place for learning and rational thought is in the middle, in what we call the zone, where the person has calm, focused alertness. Learning and emotional regulation and self-management depend on a level of arousal that is closer to the zone than either end of the continuum. And so as you're teaching your kids, or you're trying to help them change their behavior or improve their attention, you want to be aware of where they are on that continuum, because if they're too aroused or too low on that continuum of arousal, whatever we do is just going to be counterproductive. So we need to be aware of where they are. And we also want to help our children start being aware of their own arousal level and how to either increase it or decrease it. So here are some quick tips for lowering the level of arousal. Our eyes and our breath are two ways that we can consciously control our physiological stress response. You know this, we all know this. Telling someone or telling ourselves to calm down never really works. But if we step outside, or we walk forward, or even just looking out into the distance, that allows our eyes to get a wider view. And as soon as that happens, it immediately down-regulates the nervous system. So that's a tool that we want to be aware of, and we want to help our students to be aware of. Breathing in through the nose and taking long exhales through the mouth is also a way that we can signal the sympathetic nervous system to settle. So breathe in through the nose, long exhale, settles the nervous system. So this is something that we can certainly do with individual children, but even in a classroom, teaching students that when they're feeling anxious or overloaded, just look away for a minute, look out in the distance for a second, and breathe in through their nose and take a long exhale out through their mouth. That can be kind of a reset for them to kind of take care of themselves. To increase arousal, or kind of increase attention and energy, again, we can use our breath, but this time we're going to take longer inhales and breathe out quickly. So as we do that, it increases agitation and alertness. Movement is also a way to increase energy. So movement is actually a proven stimulus for energy and learning. Dr. John Rady, the author of A User's Guide to the Brain, says, exercise increases the concentration of both dopamine and norepinephrine, as well as other brain chemicals. I have always said that a dose of exercise is like taking a bit of Ritalin or Adderall. It's similar to taking a stimulant. So if your child or your students are getting sleepy, or they're on that low end of the continuum of arousal, stand up, have them stretch, or take a movement minute. It doesn't take very long, but just moving a little bit can start to increase their focus and energy. Awareness is the first step in making any change. At the Learning Center, we teach students some different types of activities that they can use as brain breaks, because it's really important to start to recognize when your brain needs a break, when you're too agitated or when you're too sleepy or tired. And so we teach students some different types of activities they can use for brain breaks. And then when we notice that they need a brain break, we can show them a picture or a list of 2 or 3 options and let them choose which one they want to do. And even if they're not fully aware of why, they usually choose the one that they need. After the brain break, we can do a quick dialogue with them to help build their awareness of their level of arousal and what they need to get into the zone. We might ask, wow, how did you choose that activity? Or we might say something like, did you notice that you were starting to move around in your chair like you were trying to keep yourself awake? That showed that you needed to get energized. So when you chose a little dance break for your brain break, that was a really good choice. So we're just trying to build an awareness of where they are in terms of their attention and their level of arousal, so that they can begin to regulate that. Number 2, what does the behavior really mean? No matter what it looks like, behavior always means something. If behavior needs to be changed, we have to first identify the real root of the problem. A lot of times we think we know what's going on with a student when they're being resistant or they're misbehaving in some way. But a lot of times what we think is the right answer isn't. So what we have to ask as parents and teachers is, what is this behavior telling me? All behavior serves us in some way. That doesn't mean that behavior is manipulative. It just means that our behavior reflects a need that we have. For example, maybe you have a child who resists doing homework. Well, how is that serving him? It may be a symptom of lagging skills. Maybe the student simply doesn't have the skills to do what's expected. So if he procrastinates or he resists or he changes the subject or any number of avoidance behaviors, he doesn't have to deal with a task that's too hard. Or maybe you'll come and sit with him and do it with him. You may have a child who tunes out during lessons in class. Well, it could be an auditory processing problem or poor comprehension. So after a while, they're just not connecting the dots right, and they can't stay tuned in. Maybe they're going through a growth spurt, so they're fatigued and they can't keep themselves alert. They may be giving into their creative thinking style because what they can create in their mind is more interesting than, what they're learning in class. So they begin to daydream. They may be on sensory overload. They're just so stressed out, they can't effectively block out other things going on around them. And so their survival mechanisms kick in and they just shut down, or they, kind of take a mental flight. We can't help a student solve a problem until we know what the problem really is. And so we have to think, what is this behavior telling me about what the child needs? At the Learning Center, I always teach my clinical staff, behavior is a teaching opportunity. We just have to look and see, what does that behavior really tell us? Number 3, build, don't be their executive function. Executive function is a frontal lobe function in the brain, and the frontal lobe is the last area of the brain to develop. It develops all the way through childhood, but the bulk of the development of executive function starts about 11 or 12 years old, and it continues through about age 25. When children are really young, adults are going to have to give them a lot of very specific direction. But as they grow, we want to give children and teens an opportunity to exercise their own executive function. So yes, we want to give them direction, but the older they get, the more they need to be allowed to do the thinking and the planning. And we can do that by guiding them as opposed to telling them every single little step. Executive function is really about your ability to imagine or play out a mental movie of how the future is going to go in time and space and in relation to who else is involved, what's going to happen. Right now, while you're in this webinar, you probably also have a mental movie running in the background about what you're going to do after the webinar, or you may be visualizing how you're going to apply some of the things we're talking about in your home or in your school. When parents and teachers, however well-meaning, micromanage and direct every single piece of a child's life, or we make them pay attention or behave or comply, they may be inadvertently taking away the child's opportunity to exercise and develop their own executive function skills. Kids need the opportunity and the guidance to practice mental planning and problem solving throughout the day. So some really good language that you can use is to say, what's your plan? For example, as a parent, instead of saying, get dressed, brush your teeth, and then put your books and homework in your backpack, the parent could say, what's your plan for getting ready for school? Now the student has to visualize into the future about what they're going to do. Have your child tell exactly what they see themselves doing. So now they're picturing it and they're saying something like, I'm going to go to my room and get dressed, and then I'm going to go to the bathroom and brush my teeth. And then I see myself walking to the table in the kitchen and getting my books and homework and putting them in my backpack. This is exactly how our executive function works to plan. Teachers can do this in the classroom throughout the day. Teach your students that planning is picturing themselves doing something. So have them visualize and mentally talk themselves through their actions. Use language like, what's your plan? Or visualize this. So you might say, what's your plan for getting ready for math? Or visualize the first 3 things that you will do when you start this assignment. And it might be as simple as, I'm going to open my book and put my name on my paper and read the instructions. But if you're a teacher, you have kids that when you say, get out your math books and start your assignment, kids get out their math book, maybe, and then they just sit there. But if you first kind of primed them and said, visualize the first 3 things that you're going to do, now they've got a mental plan and they can get going. If we guide students through questioning instead of telling them every single thing, they get to exercise their executive function. And ultimately, that allows them to become more independent. we want to problem solve together with our children and students. This applies to individuals and specific problems, but you can also do this process as a whole class for challenges that come up that affect the group, like how to work together in a group, or how to move from place to place in the classroom, how to make sure assignments get turned in. Anything that presents a problem to be solved, you can engage the students in that process. And so here are some steps for doing that. Step one, we really want to understand and address the right problem. So we have to get their take on the problem. We do this by observing, exploring, dialoguing, and listening to the student to understand what's beneath the behaviors that you're seeing. What does this student really need? We want to ask and we want to listen without judgment. Don't share your opinion. Don't give advice. You might lead the discussion with something like, I notice, tell me about that. For example, let's take a student who does her homework, but she always forgets to turn it in. So you might say, hey, I notice that you have a lot of missing homework assignments. Tell me about that. It's non-judgmental. It's opening the door. Now, a lot of times kids they don't really know what the problem is, and you're going to have to do some exploring. So maybe the student says, I don't know, I just forget. So then you have to explore with some questions. Do you do your homework? Do you get to class on time? What happens when you get to class? Are you early or do you feel rushed? And so as you kind of ask questions and let them dialogue with you, maybe with this student, you find out that she says, hey, I never have time to see my friends except during passing period. And so by the time I get to class is starting and I can't find my homework fast enough, so I can't get it turned in. So now we know that this student needs to have time to talk to her friends. That's really important to her. And she doesn't have a good organizational system for finding her homework. So students that have behavior and attention and executive function challenges, they're just continually told how they should behave. And we make a lot of assumptions about their motives and abilities. We just have to stop that. We really have to take the time to listen and understand what they need in order to be successful. And we've found when we do that, kids, they have so much more buy-in. They feel heard, like they're not always being told, but they're a part of this process. So that's step number one. Step number two is what change is needed. This is really your take on the problem. So share with the student what you need or what's needed in the classroom or what change is needed. You want to be clear and direct, but don't blame, don't tell the student what to do. So for example, with this problem, with the student who's doing her homework, but she doesn't turn it in, here's the deal. Homework has to be turned in on time. So step number three, now that we know both parts of the problem, we know that the girl, the student, needs to be able to see her friends, and she doesn't have a good way of finding her homework. And we know that, the teacher and the parent need the homework to be turned in. So now that we know both sides, we need to collaborate on a solution. We want to brainstorm all the possible solutions. And again, you can do this as a classroom or you can do it individually, whatever the problem is. I like to write down all of the solutions that come up. And I always tell the students, anything that comes into your mind as a solution, let's just put it out there. And then we'll evaluate together. So once we have all our different solutions, then we're going to visualize and talk through each one to see how it would work. So let's say that some of the solutions that we came up with for this problem were: don't do the homework, don't talk to friends, put the homework for each class in the book for that class, have a red homework folder that's easy to see in the backpack, so it's easy to find the homework. Set a timer on the phone during passing period in order to get to class a minute earlier. So then you go through each solution. So let's take the one, don't do homework. Okay, well, does that meet both needs? No, it doesn't meet the need of getting the homework turned in. How about don't talk to friends? Well, now the student visualizes that she's ignoring her friends as she walks to class, and her friends are mad and she's mad. Well, no, that's not a good solution because it doesn't meet her need. Maybe she gets homework in on time, but it doesn't meet her need. What about the solution of a red homework folder? So she pictures herself getting into class right as class is starting. She can easily see the homework folder, pulls it out, and she can get her homework in. Okay, so that might be one that could work. It meets both needs. So step number 4 is after you've determined the best solution, then everybody needs to commit to trying it. So she needs to commit to trying using a red homework folder for a few days, for the rest of the week. And then step number 5 is to regroup and evaluate, did it work? This is really important. It's going to take monitoring. Any problem that you're trying to solve together, it's going to take monitoring. And so come back together, see if it worked. If it didn't, what changes do we need to make? If it did, let's keep going and check back in and see if it's still working. Number 4 is the dopamine reward system. We have a reward system in our brain, and we can take advantage of that. Dopamine is a brain chemical that increases energy, motivation, and our internal sense of well-being. When dopamine is released, epinephrine, or the same chemical as adrenaline, but just in the brain, it's called epinephrine, also tends to be released. And epinephrine is involved with increasing a sense of agitation or urgency and desire and willingness to go, to move forward. Dopamine is released when something good happens. It's also released in anticipation of things. So anytime we're focused on an external goal, dopamine is queued up, anticipating a milestone, and that keeps us moving forward towards it. Each time a milestone or goal is reached, the brain gets a little dopamine reward. So as applied to executive function, having realistic goals and small manageable steps helps trigger the dopamine reward system, which helps increase energy, motivation, sense of urgency, willingness to move forward, and it makes you feel good. There is research that shows that when people can monitor their own progress, they do better. Well, that's sort of taking advantage of this system. You have a little goal, you get to monitor and see how you're doing, and that is motivating and rewarding as long as the milestones are achievable. Number 5, inner language. When we plan or organize or weigh possibilities or make decisions, we use our inner language to do that. We have two types of inner language. We have visual inner language, which is visualization, and we have verbal inner language, which is talking ourselves through things. We want to be intentional about stimulating, visualizing, and verbalizing all the time. And get your kids to use gestures, because gestures support language and stimulate visualizing in time and space. As you're teaching, stimulate students to visualize, to turn language into images. This is going to support memory. It's going to support comprehension. And it's a lot more interesting, so it supports attention too. One of the things that's really helpful is to make images on the wall. So maybe you are reading a little section of history and you visualize it together and you create an image of the key players, the key events, and anchor that on the wall. So when we visualize, we tend to look up, and we can visualize that image up a little above our eye level, but it's really helpful to anchor it somewhere. So if you find a blank space on the wall, then say, okay, look at that spot on the wall and just kind of see your mental image right there. And as the teacher, you could even go up to the wall and point to different things as you build the image together. Anchoring it really supports memory. And then as you continue reading or discussing or lecturing and getting new information, create another image and anchor that on the wall. And what happens is this really gives the students a good picture of everything that's happening. You see the sequence, and it's a great tool for discussion and review. And you're stimulating visualizing, which is a huge piece of executive function and comprehension. If your child is having trouble following directions, it's most likely because he doesn't have the same mental movie as you do, or maybe he isn't creating a mental movie. So maybe your child has finished breakfast and you say, okay, go upstairs, brush your teeth, and get your schoolwork from your desk. And then when you go upstairs, you find your child sitting on the floor playing with Legos. Well, that's not because he was trying to ignore what you said or he's being defiant. It's because he didn't have the same mental picture or mental movie as you do. You pictured all the things he was supposed to do, but he didn't get beyond go upstairs. So what you can do is at the bottom of the stairs, you can say, point out your plan for getting your teeth brushed and getting your schoolwork from your desk. Just pointing really stimulates visual images. So now the student is visualizing and actually helping themselves project into the future in time and space through pointing. And I realized doing this takes a little bit of extra time. It takes a little extra time in your lessons at school. It takes a little bit of extra time as you're getting ready for school or activities at home. But think about how much extra time you spend repeating yourself. If you just tell your kids what to do, or you tell your students and then they don't get it and you have to reteach, as soon as you can stimulate that mechanism of visualizing and attaching it with language, it's ultimately going to save you time. And it's building their comprehension and executive function skills. Now, we can take some things to practice. We can take things like, you want to do things, real life things. So let's say you take their calendar and you have the student look at their calendar and notice when their history paper is due. So they notice, okay, my history paper is due on Tuesday. Great. Now look up, and I want you to picture your calendar in your mind. And we always have students look up, because that triggers visual memory and visual processing. So they're going to look up, picture their calendar, and where do you see that your history paper is due? Oh, I see it right here. It's due on Tuesday. Great. Now let's say that your teacher extends the due date by 3 days. So now when is your paper due? Okay, well, it's on Tuesday, but now I have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's going to be due on Friday. So I can picture it on Friday now. So having them visualize and manipulate images, again, is exactly what our executive function does as we problem solve and as we manage time. Most of you probably have a picture of your calendar in your mind, and you often have to manipulate where things are in order to fit everything in. So we just want to practice that with our students. Now, the other inner language that we have is verbal inner language. Language gives us a tool for evaluating our actions before they happen, and it kind of helps curb impulsiveness. And we do that by verbalizing through it or talking ourselves through it. So we want to teach students to use their verbal inner language to guide themselves in order to bring executive function to a conscious level. So let's say that you have a student that every time they finish a paper, you have to remind them to put their name on their paper because they always forget. And maybe you do that through questioning. So the student finishes their paper, they say, I'm done. You say, what do you need to remember to put on your paper? Oh, my name. So now, instead of you asking them the question, you might say, the student says, I'm done. You say, what question am I going to ask you? Ask yourself that. So all we're doing is getting them to start to say, oh, did I put my name on my paper? Oh, I have to do that. In social situations, our verbal inner language, our ability to kind of talk ourselves through things, helps us to make good decisions, to predict how someone else is going to feel. And so if you have students that tend to have some social issues, you want to work on kind of asking themselves some questions. If I do this, how will the other person respond? Stop and picture that and talk it through. Will their feelings get hurt? Is it better not to say anything? Our inner language is a huge factor in self-management. We had a student, he was 14, he was in 8th grade, and he was really brilliant, very high IQ, performed really well on all academic testing, but he was failing everything because he didn't do any work. But worse than that, he was constantly in trouble at school because he would do things like he would walk past someone's desk and he would just knock all their papers off. And then he would say, I didn't mean to. And everyone would look at him like, oh, well, we just watched you do that. So when we were working with him, we asked him if he ever thought about what he was going to do before he did it. And did he make a plan? And he says, I like to live in the present, which actually is kind of the definition of ADHD, because people with ADHD, which is associated with poor executive function often, they live in the now. Whatever is right now, present right now, is what they're thinking about. And they're not seeing ahead, thinking about the consequences, and they're not projecting back into the past to learn from their mistakes. So Nicholas was like that. He said, I just like to live in the present. He couldn't visualize the potential consequences of his behavior. He would impulsively do things. And he said it was sort of like an experiment, because he didn't know what would happen. So we started working with him on visualizing himself doing things before he did them and talking it through. And at first we had him do it out loud and then with his inner voice, but I mean, every single thing. So if he was going to go get a drink, go to the water fountain during a session, he needed to get some water. He had to stop. He had to visualize himself walking out of the workstation, who he would pass on the way, what he would do or not do. He had to visualize and talk through every single thing he was going to do before he did it. And that definitely took some practice, very consistent practice, but before long, he started to control his impulses. And even more, he started to be able to take some perspective and predict how others would react if he did something, which was really huge for him socially. So that inner language is something we just want to stimulate and develop all the time. Number 6, build the critical underlying skills. The best guidance and strategies in the world will not work if the student doesn't have the skills to do the job. We think about learning like a continuum that builds kind of like a ladder. And you can see school skills, academics are up at the top of the ladder. And then the rungs underneath are all these different areas of processing and neurodevelopmental and executive function skills. These are the supports that allow students to work comfortably and effectively and independently at the top of the ladder. If any of those underlying skills are weak or inefficient, it's going to cause them to struggle, to have to work harder, longer. It's going to get in the way of their attention. And so if any of these skills like memory, auditory processing, visual processing, which is not your hearing or seeing, but how your brain perceives and thinks about information that you hear and see, or processing speed or language processing, if any of those things are weak or inefficient, it's going to get in the way of working effectively at a higher level. So let me give you an example. We had a student, a wonderful, wonderful, motivated student who was a senior in high school. She had an auditory processing disorder, and her notes were really spotty and disorganized. And so you might think, okay, she doesn't know how to take notes. We're going to teach her a note-taking strategy. But the problem for her wasn't that she didn't know how to take notes. It was that she was working excessively hard to get the information when listening. And she was also reading the teacher's lips because her auditory processing was so weak that it just took a tremendous amount of energy. So the information for her was coming in too fast for her delayed auditory system to process. So there were gaps, and she was constantly trying to connect the dots. And there was just no mental attention left for thinking about a note-taking strategy. And as soon as she would look down at her paper, then she lost all those visual cues that she was getting from the teacher's mouth and body language. So the first step in the solution for this student was not a note-taking strategy, but auditory training so that she could get good input to think with. And then once she was able to get better auditory information, now she had the mental energy and the information to apply to a note-taking strategy. So this is just important to keep in mind that sometimes underlying skills, especially with our neurodiverse learners, are getting in the way the higher level skills that we're trying to teach them. So here is a quick recap of executive function principles. Number one, where are they on that continuum of arousal? Number two, what does the behavior tell us? Number three, build, don't be their executive function. You don't want to do all the thinking for them. You want to guide them in doing the thinking and planning. Number four, our brain likes small attainable goals. So take advantage of that dopamine reward system. Number five, stimulate inner language. So visualizing and self-dialogue or questioning. And number six, build the critical underlying skills. When students are struggling, there usually are underlying learning issues at the root of the problem. And that may be something that you're going to have to investigate and will likely need some outside help for. But I just want you to know that most learning and attention challenges can be permanently changed or corrected by addressing the underlying skills that are at the root of the problem. I have a couple of resources for you. The first is my first book, At Wit's End, A Parent's Guide to Ending the Struggle, Tears, and Turmoil of Learning Disabilities. To get a free copy, you can go to parentsatwitsend.com. So often when you have a learning or attention challenge, people want to give you coping strategies and accommodations. And what I'm trying to tell people in this book is that accommodations are a short-term solution. But if we want to make real and permanent changes, we have to identify and address the weak or underdeveloped processing or learning skills that are lower down on that learning skills continuum or ladder. Those skills that aren't supporting the student well enough. The other resource I have for you is an executive function cheat sheet. If you use the QR code there, you can download this, and it just is going to help you remember these things and give you some ways to apply them throughout your day. At Stowell Learning Centers, we work both on-site and remotely with children and adults doing targeted brain training to permanently eliminate struggles associated with dyslexia, auditory processing, attention, executive function, and learning differences so that students can become confident, independent learners. We have tons of information on our website that you can access. If we can help you or you would like to talk to someone about your child, you can visit us online at stowellcenter.com to schedule a free video conference. I thank you for letting me share with you today. I hope there were some nuggets that you can take away and apply immediately. And I think we might have a little bit of time for questions.
Thank you so much, Jill. Thank you so much. That was a brilliant presentation, and I'm positive that we didn't just have a few things to learn. We had a good number of things to learn from your presentation. I have one question in the chat box, and then I have two questions that were sent ahead of the webinar. So the question in the chat box says, will the slides be available after the webinar? Is it okay to share the slides, or what is your position on that?
Sure, it is okay to share the slides, and you have them, so will you do that on your end?
Okay. Also, is it okay to put this up on our YouTube page and refer people to watch it later on?
Absolutely, that would be great.
Thank you so much. This is so generous. Thank you. So the first question I have here, I've asked for anyone else who has a question to put their questions in here. The first question says, how do we as teachers or educators know that we're dealing with executive function difficulties? Is there a test, an assessment, or a yardstick for us to know that the difficulty a child is experiencing is an executive function difficulty? So that's the first question.
Let me see if I can. Oh, I was trying to stop sharing my screen. Did I lose you?
No. Yeah, you stopped sharing.
Okay. Oh, there we are. Okay. So there, if you think about that continuum of learning, that can kind of guide you a little bit. Executive functions are really pretty high level thinking skills. And if you have a student that you look at them and, they're just, kind of all over the place physically, they don't seem to be real aware. We've had teachers say, he's just not thinking. He gets up and walks around in the middle of class. Well, you could think, oh, well, that's poor executive function. He's not controlling his behavior. He's not thinking about it. But the bottom line is that's probably much lower on the continuum. It's probably a body issue. And so if you're kind of aware of what some of those lower level issues are, because executive function is supported by the ability to control your body, and to be able to remember and to get good information auditorily or visually. So you kind of have to explore what that really looks like for the student and whether this is truly a choice or something else getting in the way. And often it is something else getting in the way. And that's where I think the book that At Wit's End is really helpful in looking at, what those underlying skills are. I do have a new book called Take the Stone Out of the Shoe, and it's available on Amazon. It also really digs into those underlying issues. It gives parents and teachers a lot of strategies to use, and also then the research behind tools. But I think the biggest thing is you just need an awareness that not everything you see is a choice, and if you think, like in the example of the note taking, if you think, oh, well, I can see she doesn't know how to take notes, I'm going to teach her how to take notes, but then she's still not able to do it or not following through. I'm going to teach this child how to use a planner, but then they're not able to do it, or they're not doing it. There's probably something underneath that. And so that's not truly exactly an executive function issue. It's lower. That's what we need to be aware of. There is a questionnaire called the BRIEF, Behavior Rating Inventory. Well, it's called the BRIEF, BRIEF. And that is, it is for executive function. And you can look at parents, teachers, and students can fill it out. It's quite an extensive questionnaire and kind of give you an idea where the challenges are in executive function. So that also is helpful.
Thank you. Thank you for all the resources. The second question I have is from someone who says, I have a student who we created a visual reminder for and pasted it on his desk, but then he still forgets to use the visual reminder. How do I address this?
First, you want to make sure that he really understands what it's for and how to use it. Sometimes things make sense to us and we implement them, but the child doesn't really totally get it. And so make sure that they really get it, what it's for and how to use it. And then remember that you have to practice. So maybe, you know, when they're by themselves, I mean, we do this in the Learning Center because we aren't in school with kids. So maybe we're gonna teach them how to use a visual reminder, but we have to practice. We'll say, okay, teacher's giving you an assignment. Now picture what you're going to do, talk yourself through it. So they kind of role play or visualize and verbalize through it a number of times. And then, you know, maybe the next step is the teacher then just walks by the desk and touches the visual reminder. So now the student knows to look, and then, you know, really validate the student when they respond from that cue. And then the next step is to say, wow, you're so good at using your visual reminder when I come by and point to it. Do you think you could do it without me even pointing? And so kind of challenge them and see if they can do it. And if they can't, you know, set up something together. But we just have to know that often there are a lot of steps to practicing a new tool and monitoring it.
Well, okay, so I'll take the privilege and ask the last question. We don't have any questions in the chat box, but I have one quick question, and this is my question. And that is, where is the place of rewards in all of this? So maybe like the last example, what the last person said, I'm trying to do this. If you're able to point the visual reminder to the child and the child uses it, do you get to reward the child? Is that stimulating, or would that be discouraged? Where's the place of rewarding the child for doing something?
I think it's really, we all want to be validated. It's just that sometimes what happens is we say, you know, you have this visual reward. I mean, you have this visual reminder now. So if you use that, every time you use it, I'm going to put a star on the chart, or you're going to earn this or whatever. But if they don't have the skills to do it, then rewards are really defeating. And so we just want to make sure that we're setting it up so that what we're really doing is validating that they were able to do it. So yes, rewarding and validating their progress and letting them see that is great. Rewards by themselves, if they don't have the skills to do it, are not. And a reward is not going to solve a behavior problem if we're not getting to the right issue. So that's where we have to be careful. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jill, again, and thank you to everyone who joined us. The replay will be sent, the replay link will be sent so you can watch it over and over again. Jill has shared so many things. I doubt that, you know, we'll be able to take it all in at once, and there are probably things that we want to go back to again and again. So thank you again, Jill. We'll honor people's time and we'll honor your time as well. I am super grateful that you made it here today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
All right. Thank you so much.